The probe slammed into the containment bay wall with a sharp crack, bouncing once before rolling to a stop. Shards of frost broke from its outer shell, scattering across the floor like glass. Commander Rinhold Varric braced his arms against the edge of the bay, jaw tight as he watched the engineers scramble around the battered object. "It wasn't supposed to come back this way," one of them muttered, voice strained through the respirator. Varric's mandibles flexed, a gesture his crew knew meant impatience. "It followed the tether exactly until the final kilometer," he said, his tone low, steady but sharp enough to cut. "Then something pulled it." "Art, do you still think that was natural drift?" The engineers avoided his eyes. The probe's casing was scorched, blackened along one side, as if it had grazed the edge of a star. Yet they were nowhere near a system dense enough for such burns. His crew knew it. He knew it. That was why the tension in the air felt heavier than the recycled oxygen. Science Officer Toleran hurried into the bay, her long digits clutching a data slate so tightly the screen flexed. She didn't bother with formalities, just handed it over. Varric scanned the display. The signal pulsed across it, a rhythmic pattern too sharp, too structured to be random. His chest tightened with each repetition. "It is not noise," Toleran said, her voice hushed. "It repeats with precision, Commander. Not like drift interference, not like a collapsed star. Someone made this." Varric looked back at the probe. Its sensors had scraped the edge of something vast in the dark, something that should not be there. He felt his secondary hearts kick faster in his chest. Behind him, Tactical Officer Mara Jal leaned against the bay entrance, arms crossed. "Or someone wants us to think it's a message," she said. Her tone was dry, but her eyes were locked on the probe like it was a venomous predator. "That thing didn't just come back hot. It came back running. You don't scorch a shell like that without cause." Toleran bristled. "It's a chance to discover a new intelligence, maybe the first outside council registry in decades. This is what we're here for." "And it could be bait," Mara shot back. "Tell me you don't see that pattern as a net, waiting for fools to swim in." The two women stared at each other, tension humming as steady as the ship's reactor beneath their feet. Varric silenced them with a raised hand. He felt the weight of command pressing against his chest like a physical force. His people had left the safety of council space to chart the unknown, and this was exactly the kind of discovery that made such journeys worth it. It was also exactly the kind of lure that could end them. "Enough," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but the word cut the air like a blade. "We don't know what it is yet. But I'll tell you what I do know." He turned the data slate toward them, the pulsing signal reflected in his dark eyes. "It knows we're here." The silence that followed pressed harder than the ship's hull ever could. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the floor seemed to quiver, a faint vibration that hadn't been there before. Engineers looked around, confused. Toleran's gaze darted to her instruments, but her voice caught before she could speak. The bay lights flickered once, just enough to pull every set of eyes upward. Varric's mind registered it at the same time his senses did. That wasn't the ship's systems. That was space itself being forced open. And then, without warning, it appeared. A vast silhouette tore into existence outside the bay windows, sharp lines and brutal geometry that screamed of design meant not for exploration but for war. Its skin shimmered like a living shadow as cloaking fields peeled away. Letters, white and jagged, painted across its hull came into view. USS Resolute. Varric didn't breathe. None of them did. The humans had been here all along. Captain Eleanor Ward's hands rested flat on the armrests of her chair, steady and deliberate, even as she felt the weight of every eye on her. The bridge of the Resolute had fallen into a hush, the kind that followed the first sight of another ship staring back across the void. The alien vessel hung there, smaller but sharp in design, its hull etched with markings she didn't recognize. Its posture wasn't hostile yet, but it wasn't timid either. "Range, Mr. Holt," she said. 600 meters and closing," Lieutenant Aaron Holt replied, his voice clipped. He didn't bother masking the strain in it. "They weren't expecting us, but they're not backing off either." The screens painted the alien ship in cold detail. Smooth plating that looked grown more than welded, fins curving along the hull like a predator's spine. Nothing about it seemed fragile. Ward shifted her gaze to her second-in-command. "Assessment, David?" Commander McKinley exhaled through his nose, his arms folded tight across his chest. He was a tall man with lines of fatigue carved into his face, the kind earned by too many long campaigns and too little peace. "Cautious. They've got weapons warm but not aimed. Science vessel maybe, but with teeth. Could be a recon picket." Holt turned in his chair, jaw set. "Or a forward scout for a fleet. Captain, they're running something out here. I don't like how close they let us get. Ward's mouth tugged into the faintest smile, humorless and tired. We didn't let them see us until now, Lieutenant. Let's not forget who's holding the cards. Her crew waited, tension riding the room like static before a storm. Some wanted orders to power weapons. Others wanted hails sent, fast and formal, before the aliens panicked. Ward knew what they didn't say aloud. Every ship in this sector had been warned not to provoke unnecessary engagements. The Council's eyes were everywhere, waiting for humanity to stumble again, ready to slap them back into the corner of untrustworthy, volatile newcomers. She leaned forward, elbows on knees, and studied the alien ship on the screen. It had the cautious stillness of an animal unsure whether to run or strike. They found the signal, Ward murmured. McKinley's head tilted. And they don't understand it. They're not supposed to, she said, straightening. That beacon wasn't theirs to uncover. Holt spoke before he thought better of it. So what do we do? Talk. Or make sure they don't get the chance to spread it. Ward turned her head slowly, locking him in her stare. The bridge lights caught the scar that ran just under his eye, a mark left from the last war humanity had nearly lost. He wanted to fight. She could hear it in every clipped syllable. But what he really wanted was revenge on anything not human that dared stand across from him. Lieutenant, she said softly, one day you'll learn that firing first doesn't always mean surviving longer. He looked away, his hands tightening over the console. Ward straightened in her chair and gave the order no one expected. Open a channel. Static crackled across the speakers. The comms officer frowned, trying to stabilize the frequency. A hollow echo filled the bridge as the channel linked, alien voices murmuring faintly like whispers through water. The whole crew leaned closer without meaning to. Then Ward nodded once to the comms officer. Send it. A pulse of sound left the Resolute, rippling across space. Not words. Not a greeting. The exact signal the aliens had intercepted, repeated back at them with perfect clarity. On the main screen, the alien ship flickered with sudden activity, lights flaring along its hull, systems scrambling. Confusion rippled across their formation as if they had just been struck without a single shot fired. Ward rested her chin against her knuckles, watching them struggle to comprehend. They'll understand soon enough, she whispered. A sharp chime cut her words short. Long-range sensors lit up, painting something vast stirring in the void beyond. A shape that hadn't been there before. Captain, McKinley said, his voice lower now, we're not alone out here. The hum of the bridge seemed to tighten around them as the contact swept across the displays. Lines of data scrolled too fast for the junior officers to keep up, the sound of fingers striking consoles becoming almost frantic. Captain Ward did not move at first, her eyes locked on the abstracted shape growing clearer with every pass of the sensors. It's coming from behind the signal source, McKinley said, leaning forward, his voice stripped of its usual calm. Mass readings are enormous. This isn't debris. It isn't a station either. Show me scale, Ward ordered. The screen shifted, placing the alien science vessel beside the new contact. The comparison was grotesque. The alien ship looked like a darting fish shadowed by a leviathan. Hull length registered nearly 5 times the Resolute's, with density readings that suggested it wasn't hollowed for transport but layered with armor and machinery. The bridge stayed quiet. Even Holt, who usually had a sharp word ready, sat frozen with his jaw clenched. The comms officer broke the silence. Captain, the alien ship is hailing us. Their commander wants to know if we expected this. Ward's expression hardened. Do not answer yet. Her mind worked through the angles. The aliens would think humanity had lured them here, that they were pawns in some game. And maybe, she thought grimly, they weren't wrong. The beacon had been transmitting for months. Humans had intercepted it long before anyone else stumbled across the pattern. But she had not expected whatever this was to wake so quickly. She glanced at Holt, who still watched the data flood the screen. His shoulders were tense, but she saw the flicker of something in his eyes, fear buried beneath anger. The kind of fear that remembered fire-consuming cities, the shriek of evac alarms, the helplessness of running when the sky itself tried to kill you. She had seen that fear before in too many young soldiers who believed rage would protect them. Lieutenant, Ward said evenly, what does your instinct tell you about that thing? Holt's jaw twitched. He wanted to sound confident, but when he finally spoke his voice betrayed him. It isn't alone. The deck fell silent again. No one asked him to explain. McKinley tapped his console, pulling fresh scans. The display lit with faint, flickering shapes, like ripples across black water. One, then two, then more, dozens of smaller contacts drifting in the shadow of the massive hull. Ward leaned back slowly, her chair creaking. "There's your fleet," she murmured. The alien hail chimed again, sharper this time, the tone urgent. McKinley gave her a questioning glance, but Ward raised her hand to hold him. She wanted to wait to see what the aliens would do without human guidance. Would they run? Would they try to fight? Or would they understand that their choices had just narrowed to almost nothing? On the screen, the alien ship flared with power, shields blooming into place, weapons drawing energy. They weren't waiting. They weren't asking. Holt muttered under his breath, not meant for anyone to hear, but the words carried anyway. "They think this thing can be fought." The sensor alarm cut through the bridge before anyone could respond. The massive contact ahead shifted, its bulk turning slowly, impossibly deliberate, until the forward edge of its hull aligned with the alien vessel. And then the signal changed. The rhythmic pulse that had haunted them across the void bent and warped, no longer a cry for help but a deep thrumming note that vibrated through the hull of the Resolute itself. Crew members pressed hands to their consoles, some covering their ears even though the sound wasn't truly audible. It was felt, a low tremor resonating in bone and blood. Ward rose to her feet at last. "Bring weapons online." The alien ship fired first. The void lit up. The alien vessel's opening salvo ripped across the dark like a blade of light, slamming into the titanic shape that had turned toward them. The detonation flared bright, scattering waves of plasma that made the Resolute's shields shiver even at range. On the bridge, no one cheered. The shot had struck true, but the enemy didn't even stagger. Ward gripped the railing at her chair, her voice steady. "All batteries, prepare for engagement. McKinley, feed targeting solutions to gunnery." The Resolute came alive with the sound of charging weapons, the hum and growl of reactors shifting into battle configuration. The crew moved in controlled chaos, too well drilled to panic, but the tension was raw. The massive vessel responded. Energy lanced outward in a single stroke, silent and blinding. The alien science ship's shields flared like a star before collapsing in a spray of fractured light. Its hull buckled, metal tearing open in brutal silence, venting crew and fire into the void. The bridge of the Resolute fell into stunned quiet. Ward forced herself to breathe evenly, though the image of bodies tumbling into black space pressed like a weight against her chest. She had commanded through war, through loss, but watching allies, however uneasy, die in the first exchange twisted something in her gut. Status of the alien ship? "Crippled, Captain," McKinley said grimly. "They won't survive a second hit." Holt slammed his fist into the side of his console. "They brought this on themselves. They fired first. Now they'll drag us down with them unless we put that thing in the ground." Ward shot him a hard glance but didn't disagree. Her voice sharpened. "Lock primary batteries. Spread fire across those escorts." "Yes, Captain," McKinley replied, already relaying orders. The Resolute lurched as its cannons opened fire, a rolling thunder through the hull. Red lances of energy carved across space, not elegant but relentless, punching through the smaller contacts flanking the giant. Two flared apart instantly, torn to fragments. Others swarmed closer, weaving like gnats around a wolf. "Multiple inbound strikes," the tactical officer barked. The ship shook, shields flashing as the smaller vessels returned fire. Warning klaxons screamed across the bridge. Panels sparked, one officer thrown from his seat. Ward kept her balance, teeth clenched. "Stabilize shields, reroute auxiliary power," she ordered. The aliens weren't faring better. On the cracked remains of their ship, escape pods jettisoned in frantic bursts, scattering away from the monster that had gutted them. Ward felt the instinct to order retrieval to save those lives, but the swarm made it impossible. If they slowed, they'd be torn apart. "Captain," McKinley said, his voice low, "if that main ship fires again, we won't stop it." Ward already knew. Every instinct screamed at her to think not like an officer but like the girl she once was, crouched in a bombed-out street, listening to the sound of approaching engines and wondering if it was her last hour. Back then, survival had come not from discipline but from sheer, desperate audacity. Her gaze flicked to Holt. He was waiting, jaw tight, the plea unspoken. He wanted her to unleash them to prove the humans weren't prey. She nodded once. "Lieutenant Holt, get to the launch bay. I'm authorizing your strike plan." For the first time that night, his eyes widened in surprise. Then he was on his feet, running for the lift without hesitation. McKinley turned sharply. "Eleanor, his plan is—" "I know exactly what it is," Ward cut him off. "And right now we need a little madness." Another blast from the massive vessel lit the void. This one angled past the crippled alien ship and straight toward them. The bridge went white. The impact rattled the Resolute like a struck bell. Consoles flickered, sparks showered across the bridge, and the deck lurched so violently that several officers were thrown from their stations. Eleanor Ward steadied herself against the arm of her chair, her throat raw from the shock wave that tore through the hull. For one crushing second she thought they were done. Shields at 23%. The tactical officer shouted over the ringing alarms. Structural breaches on decks 4 through 6, another voice called, panicked but fighting to stay controlled. Ward forced her lungs to fill. Seal those decks. Get damage control moving now. On the display, the massive vessel loomed closer, not rushing, but advancing with the deliberate certainty of something that had never lost a battle. Its smaller escorts swarmed around it like carrion birds, circling, striking, peeling away before the Resolute's gunners could lock them. Each second felt shorter than the last. McKinley wiped blood from his temple, his voice low. That thing isn't even trying yet. Ward looked at him, then at the enemy ship. He was right. The first strikes had been probing blows. The next would be killing shots. Status of Holt's squadron? She asked. The comms officer scrambled over his console, hands trembling as he patched through. The screen filled with the grainy feed from Holt's strike craft, the young lieutenant's face lit by the red glow of his cockpit. Launch successful, Holt reported, his voice steadier than his breathing. I've got 6 birds with me. We're running tight formation, diving through their flank. Your job is to buy us time, Lieutenant, Ward said, leaning forward. Don't waste it. He didn't nod, didn't salute, just pressed his lips into a hard line and killed the feed. McKinley's gaze slid to her. You're sending him to die. Ward didn't flinch. We're all going to die unless someone cracks open their shields. Out the viewport, the strike craft darted forward like sparks against the dark. The escorts swarmed them instantly, twisting into the path of the incoming humans, weapons flashing. One fighter spun out in a burst of fire, then another. But Holt's craft pressed on, weaving through with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. The Resolute's crew held their breath as Holt's squadron punched through the line and dove against the Leviathan's hull. Explosions flared along its armor as the fighters unleashed payloads, peppering its surface with detonations. It was not enough to wound it, but it forced the monster to slow, forced its escorts to peel away from the Resolute. Ward's fingers tightened around her chair. All batteries focus fire now. Don't waste a shot. The Resolute roared, every cannon hurling energy into the shadow. The enemy ship's shields rippled, flaring brighter with each hit. One section finally collapsed, just for a heartbeat, exposing raw armor beneath. Target lock, McKinley barked. Fire, Ward commanded. A storm of red lances crashed into the exposed flank, tearing a crater into the hull. For the first time the Leviathan shuddered. Its escort swarm faltered, thrown into chaos by the unexpected wound. The crew of the Resolute erupted in ragged cheers, hope bleeding through exhaustion. Ward didn't smile. She knew better. On the comms, Holt's voice cut through, broken by static. Direct hit on their reactors. She's bleeding but she's not down. Repeat, not down. Pull back, Holt, Ward ordered. There was silence. Then his voice returned, steady in a way that made her stomach clench. Negative, Captain. I've got one last run in me. If I push through their vent ports, I can drive the payload into their core. Lieutenant, that's suicide, McKinley snapped. Holt gave a sharp, humorless laugh. So staying out here. Tell my sister, never mind. Just finish this. The feed cut out. Ward's hand hovered in the air as if she could stop him, but she knew she couldn't. She closed her eyes for half a second, then lowered her hand and whispered, Godspeed. On the screen, Holt's fighter plunged through the storm, weaving between fire so thick it turned space into a net of light. His craft tore into the vent channels, payload armed. The explosion that followed ripped through the Leviathan's flank, splitting armor like bone. A shockwave burst outward, blinding sensors, shaking the Resolute to its core. When the light cleared, the massive vessel was staggering, half its escorts shredded, hull bleeding energy in fountains of plasma. It wasn't dead, but it was crippled. The bridge fell into silence. Holt was gone. His squadron was gone. But the impossible had been done. Ward's throat was tight, but she forced her voice out. McKinley, prepare the weapon. His head snapped toward her. You can't mean. I do, she said, steel hard in her tone. If that thing survives long enough to signal back to its fleet, everything we've lost here means nothing. We finish this. The weapons arming sequence began, deep beneath the Resolute's decks, a rumble that resonated through the ship like the heartbeat of some ancient beast. Crew exchanged frightened glances, none daring to speak. They all knew the weapon wasn't just a blade for the enemy. It was a coin toss with annihilation on both sides. On the screen, the alien vessel drifted into view, its hull torn open, escape pods still launching. Ward felt Varric's eyes on her from across the void, though they had never spoken. She knew what he would think, that humanity was reckless, dangerous, willing to burn itself alive just to win. Maybe he was right. Weapon ready, McKinley said, his voice like gravel. Ward nodded once. Fire. The void ignited. The Resolute's weapon unleashed a wave of light so pure it stripped the shadows from the stars. The crippled Leviathan convulsed under the impact, hull splitting apart in molten fissures. One by one, its escorts collapsed, consumed by the storm. The shockwave rolled over the alien wreckage, over the pods, over the Resolute itself, hammering its shields into nothing and leaving metal groaning under the strain. When the fury faded, the battlefield was silent. The Leviathan was gone. Its fleet was gone. Only wreckage drifted, glowing with dying embers. The Resolute floated in the aftermath, hull torn, engines failing, life support limping. Ward sat back slowly, her vision swimming. Her crew was alive, or what was left of them. Then the comms crackled. A sound cut through the static, familiar, repeating. The signal. But it had changed again. No longer a distress call, no longer a lure. The rhythm clicked down in harsh precision, each beat tighter than the last. A countdown,